Hello, it is wonderful to be back with a new episode of Open Conversations, a series wherein which I speak to LGBTQI+ musicians, performers, songwriters, producers and composers to learn more about their practices, their interests, and to provide a platform for LGBTQI+ artists. My name is Will Davenport, I'm a composer myself, and I am incredibly grateful to have been offered this platform by Emily Saunders to further represent such a broad spectrum of incredible LGBTQI+ musicians. You can catch the first episode of my series of conversations via the link below, where I spoke to the incredible musicians Luca Manning and Asher Finn. For this episode, I am joined by composer Philip Venables, who has been described as a composer of ferocious dramatic instincts and an arrestingly original musical personality. Philip's output covers opera, music theatre, multimedia concert works, chamber music and song, an eclectic range of styles and influences, and themes such as social politics, violence, gender and storytelling. It was a real pleasure spending time with Philip and listening to them talk about their collaboration with Ted Huffman, their relationship with performers, and also just generally their life as a composer. Thank you so much, Philip, for joining me today. And thank you. And I wanted to start by asking sort of what does a day look like for you at the moment?
Well, I just got back from some rehearsals and a production, an opera production. So now I'm back home in the studio and I'm just working on a piano piece. So I'm just staying at home and working every day. I try to keep like broadly office hours, or to just work during the day and to take evenings and weekends off and stuff like that. Since the last 3 or 4 years, I haven't done anything. I don't have any other jobs other than composing. I'm only doing this. So luckily I have the flex. I just try and work every day, kind of Monday to Friday, and some days are successful and some days are not, as it always is. I'm not that strict about it.
Living in Berlin, does that allow you that flexibility?
It certainly did when I moved here. Yeah, when I left London, it was partly because of the cost of living in London and the amount of time I had to devote to composition. So when I came here, I was, of course, still doing other work because I wasn't really making any money from composing. But I was doing less other work and I had more time to think about composing, and that certainly made a big difference. It's really great. It's like a snowball effect. Of course, the more time I have to work on it, then the more opportunities come, I suppose.
So before that, when you were in London, you were sort of balancing lots of teaching, lots of work,
teaching, some arts management work, some conducting of like local youth orchestras and stuff like that. Yeah.
How did you meet Ted? How did you sort of build that collaboration?
Well, Ted and I met, so in 2012, I was doing a kind of scratch workshop devised opera called Unleashed, which was kind of about queer personal histories about sex. And I was working with Nick Blackburn, and we interviewed lots of gay guys in Manchester, about their sex lives, and made that into a piece in Grimebourne and at Tete a Tete that summer. And anyway, Ted was doing a production of The Lighthouse at the Limbury with Richard Baker, and I was friendly with Richard Baker, and Richard brought Ted along to the show, and that's how we met in 2012. And then we went for a drink afterwards, and since then, we just stayed in touch over Facebook, and gradually talked more and more about the kinds of opera we were interested in. And that 2012 project was one of the first kind of operatic projects, but music theatre pieces that I worked on. So it was also the kind of beginning of my interest in that.
Are you sort of constantly meeting up with Ted? Are there lots of emails? Are there WhatsApp texts all the time?
There's a massive amount of WhatsApp texts, basically. So as I said, we met in 2012 and we talked a lot about work then, but we didn't work together until 2016 on 448. But ever since then, we've always basically been working on a piece together, whether that be a little tiny piece or another opera, or ideas for pieces.
I think that must be really helpful, especially as a composer, when it can be so isolating and there can be days where you just sort of can lose track of time and reality. And if you have that relationship with a collaborator, then you can sort of immediately go to that and it sort of bounces ideas and you get a new perspective on that. Would you say that it feels like that with the relationship?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's why that's why I really love working with him and really love working with a collaborator who's where it's not just a one-off relationship, because we know each other's interests and tastes so well, and we know we can really predict how the other one will approach something, or the kind of subject matter that we might be interested in. We both very much have the same kind of objectives, if you like, or like desires of the kinds of work that we want to make. So it's a very good match in that sense. Through lockdown, we spent a lot of time, because obviously both of us had no work, and particularly Ted, all the shows were cancelled. So we spent a lot of time working on new ideas for pieces, and that was super nice, discussing, reading, watching things, discussing, drawing up pictures and stuff. But we were doing all of that over Zoom because he was in the States and couldn't leave because of all the travel restrictions. And I was in Paris.
But yeah, it's very refreshing that a lot of like your process as a composer is very, very collaborative with performers too, that you spend a lot of time sort of getting to know a performer, sort of learning about their life story too, almost, and then incorporating their personality into the piece. I assume that can be such a long collaborative process too. Does that involve lots of workshopping and lots of emails?
We got into like these kind of queer history pieces, and it was just an accident, I think, because we had the opportunities to make a few small pieces, which we've always seen as really good things to do as kind of testing grounds for larger pieces to test ideas out, or processes or things like that. And we've been really interested in interviewing performers that we work with when they're kind of solo pieces or small pieces, interviewing them about their life stories or something, and then making a very, very personalized piece about that. We're really interested in the kind of meta level in things, so where a piece might be about a performer or even about ourselves, putting ourselves into the piece in some way. So those processes tend to revolve around interviews, a series of interviews with the performers, and then working on that verbatim text. And then maybe we'll kind of do more traditional workshops with the instrument or singing if it's a voice, but usually it's just a lot of interviews.
Your piece, my favorite piece is the Goldberg Variations, for accordionist Andreas Borgard. It left me sobbing basically at the end. Like, it is such a touching, intimate piece, and it's of epic proportions, epic emotional proportions. Really, it felt operatic in itself. How long did you spend interviewing Andreas's mom, and how long did it take to build a relationship, because it's so personal and intimate?
Well, not that long, actually. I mean, it was a lockdown project, this piece. I mean, it wasn't planned to be, but it just happened that it ended up being like that because it had to get done during lockdown. So nothing was in person, unfortunately. Everything was over Skype. Having said that, we did interview Andreas in person, me and Ted in Berlin, and spent a whole day with him talking about his life and just chatting and everything. That was really, really nice. And we thought we were going to make a piece just based on his interviews, but then we got very interested in talking to his mom and asked him if, whether that would be okay with him and with Susanna as well, of course. And so he talked to her and she agreed. And then Ted just did a number of interviews over Skype with her. So I don't think they've ever actually met in person. I have met Susanna in Copenhagen since then, but Susanna was really lovely and very open about talking about anything that we wanted to talk about. And in the end, it became based on those interviews with her.
And from the beginning of the commission, did you immediately know that that's what you wanted to do, that you wanted to do quite an intimate story?
No, we knew we wanted to do something queer, I think. I mean, Andreas had specifically commissioned a piece that involved not just playing the accordion, because his PhD, because this piece is actually part of his PhD and his practice is all about like extra musical performance. So that might be movement or speaking or singing or any other stuff with video, etc. And so we had to incorporate. So I mean, speaking for me was the obvious thing to kind of draw on. So I think we knew we wanted a kind of storytelling, a kind of like troubadour type model for the piece, where this person comes along with their accordion and kind of tells you an epic tale. But we had lots of ideas. Like it could have been, I was quite interested in doing something that was quite formalized, like through the 12 months of the year or other kind of 4 seasons. Something that felt like cyclical about birth and death, and but it could have been like a faggot cookbook or something. Those were some ideas that we we also had, like, oh, maybe we just make little vignettes for each month of the year or something. We always do now, working with performers, interview them anyway, just to see if something interesting comes out, even if we don't know what we're looking for. And that's what we did in this case.
And then do you have the text sort of formalized before you write a single note, or how does that?
Mostly, yeah. In this case, yes. But with lots and lots and lots of discussions before that point about the form of the piece and what the structure is, so that we work on the structure very much together. There aren't any surprises when the text is finished.
Yeah, and I find it really interesting that always the material, the texts and the materials that you use are deeply sort of provocative and emotional, and there's sort of this emotional heart to them. So I assume that when you're composing, you can always go back to that, and maybe if that isn't there, if it doesn't provoke an emotional response, then there's going to be further sort of fine-tuning there. Would you say that is, you can always go back to the text
or the form? I mean, we're both very keen to have a strong and very clear form in most pieces. So that's also a guiding principle, if you like.
And it was really emotional, also featuring a coming out story within that. And it's also really funny how it's sort of approached from the mother's perspective by saying, oh, he told us, and then we continued eating our dinner. And it felt so relatable. But I found it really interesting that it's a very specific coming out story, and that we all have our own specific coming out story. So is this something that you've written about before, like other stories like that? Have you written about your own story?
I haven't written about my own coming out story yet. Well, I'm not sure about that. I haven't actually even thought about that. Maybe another time. Unleashed, this kind of scratch queer sex history opera that I was talking about at Tete and Grindborn. I mean, there probably were some bits about coming out in that, but that was mainly more about like sex and virginity and kind of sexual development and stuff like that.
Do you ever sort of put your own experiences into the music, or do you largely like to work with other people's text?
No, I have. I mean, actually, I took a kind of, I take New Year's resolutions quite seriously. And in 2018, I made one which was, I wanted to try and put myself in every piece that I wrote, or at least ask the question in every piece whether there was a space to put myself in it in some way. And wasn't really like a kind of narcissistic thing, I hope, but more just always trying to try, like I said, try and make pieces which are a bit more meta. So that year I made a violin concerto, which was very much about me and about me learning the violin when I was a kid, and about a moment when I went to go and have a lesson with my teacher's teacher, who was a refugee from the Hungarian Revolution in '56, and then was teaching violin in Manchester at the Royal Northern College. And yeah, she had taught my teacher, he had taught my teacher, and she had then taken a bunch of her students to go and have like a masterclass lesson with him. And there was a videotape of that lesson and of me playing. So I used the audio of me playing in the piece. And the whole thing is kind of like an alternation between my story of learning the violin and meeting him and researching his life to make the violin concerto, and alternating with he wrote like his own memoirs as well about his experiences in Hungary during and after the Second World War and under Soviet occupation, and then during the '56 revolution. He was essentially a political dissident, and very active one. He spent some time in prison in a labor camp in Hungary, but then escaped during or just before the revolution in '56. So yeah, it alternated between these two stories really. And then just towards the end of a piece, you hear a little bit of me playing some Bartok to him and him giving me feedback.
How does that feel when you listen back to it? Do you sort of cringe, or is there a distance now?
No, there's a disconnect. I mean, no, I was really happy with the piece, and it was the first time in quite a while that I'd made a piece completely on my own, because as you say, most of the things I've been doing have been collaborative in the last 5 years. So but it still had text in it with recorded voiceover, so my voice and then an actor playing his voice. But I'd written all the text myself, partly based on his memoirs and then my own text about my own experience. But yeah, it was the first time I'd done that. I was quite pleased with it though. Thought it worked okay. It's a double-edged sword because I don't want to make things on my own usually. I like the collaborative aspect.
No, I was just going to say, I find it really interesting how you use the term opera and musical, and sort of they're sort of culturally loaded words. And like, how do you navigate that? How do you feel about like the term opera?
I'm quite relaxed about what an opera is, what music theatre is. Some people have quite strict definitions, I think. I mean, for me, I don't find it too difficult, I guess, because where the two operas that I've made so far have both involved the kind of trained operatic voice, which I guess a lot of people would define as being a core ingredient of an opera. I haven't been that interested in, I like that voice, so I enjoy working with that voice. And the kinds of things the kinds of ways in which I suppose I'm trying to challenge the form of opera is not necessarily in the use of the voice. So in that way, I don't really come unstuck with whether things are opera or not. I suppose I'm going more in a music theatre direction now, using more spoken text. The next project I'm doing is we're trying to call it a musical, or like it's definitely be more like a diverse range of musical styles. So yeah, I don't know, but it doesn't really bother me. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's really great when you can make things which people can't quite say, well, is it an opera? Is it not an opera? I mean, to me, it doesn't really matter. I understand to producing houses, it does matter. But it's nice to have that debate.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's normally someone else's concern, isn't it? Is what a critic has to say about it rather than actually the composer. When you're actually writing it, you're not thinking, well, where does this fit? Is this really an opera? Or
and actually the best piece of advice I ever got was from when I was writing 448 Psychosis. James Weeks was my supervisor at the Guildhall, one of my two supervisors at the Guildhall. And the best piece of advice he gave me when I was doing that was, well, basically you want to write a piece that people come out of and say, well, that wasn't an opera. And that really stuck with me when I was writing it.
What was your experience at Guildhall? Did you enjoy that period?
Yeah, it was really amazing. I had started 1 year of PhD at the Royal Academy, actually, which was also really, really amazing because it was where I'd done my master's, so I knew everybody in it and everything. But then this opportunity for the joint program with the Opera House and the Guildhall came along, and it was the first time that they had done it. So I thought I just have to apply for that. And yeah, I'm super, super glad I did. It's a really bold, amazing scheme that this kind of joint PhD with the Opera House that the Guildhall have put together.
Did you always want to do a PhD? Was that an idea, or was this sort of like a right place at the right time kind of opportunity?
It was a bit of both, really. I mean, I did it quite late, like I was already mid-30s or 34, 35 when I started it. So it was kind of something that I came back to after I felt that like what I wanted to do had really settled, so that it felt very much like I was doing the PhD because I was just for the purposes of kind of spending more time thinking about my work and knowing exactly what I wanted to investigate and what really kind of excited me, rather than the kind of academic qualification aspect of it.